Hello, everyone. My name is David Linden, the head of energy transition for the Westwood Global Energy Group, a global research and consulting house specializing in the energy sector. And for this session, I'm going to be your moderator. It's great to be here at Pivot, and I hope everyone is enjoying themselves so far. I've heard some good things. But today, the theme is, ready to launch. We're actually finishing, I guess, the day with a couple of people who are actually making it happen right now. So this is a good conversation, just for that. But our conversation is going to touch on something a little different. It's not something we often talk about, and that's actually the need to have a feasible offtaker to enable geothermal in the first place. So it's important we recognize that. And we also need to understand how that kind of developer off-taker relationship essentially is structured, as well as under what conditions it really is even feasible in the first place. And so what we're going to do is we're going to explore that through the eyes of Google and Fervo Energy, the relationship or the partnership, should I say, that they have, represented here today by Adam Forni and Tim Latimer, respectively. Gents, can I maybe get each of you to spend 30 seconds or so just to introduce yourselves first, maybe starting with Adam, alphabetically, start with you.
Thank you, David. Yeah, thrilled to be on, excited for Pivot. It's been a great show so far. I'm Adam Forni, Technical Program Manager on Google's climate team. Background in mechanical, electrical engineering, and some market research. But I've been here about 2 years and working on strategy and road mapping for especially new hardware technologies aligned with our decarbonization goals of net zero by 2030 and carbon-free energy, 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2030. So glad to be here. Hand it to Tim.
Hey, great to be here as well. Thanks for that intro, David. I'm Tim Latimer. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Fervo Energy, a role I've been excited to have for the last 5 years when we co-founded the company in 2017. By way of background, I guess very in line with the pivot theme of this conference, like probably a lot of the panelists and attendees, I started my career in the oil and gas industry. I worked as a drilling engineer for BHP Billiton, primarily in the Eagle Ford Permian Basin in South and West Texas to start my career. Before I got very passionate about geothermal and decided to move my career in this direction, and really excited to be back and speaking at Pivot again this year.
Super. Great to have you, Tim and Adam. Thank you so much. Let's get straight into it. We've only got a short period of time to cover, I think, what is quite an interesting topic for this particular conference. So let's start off with, I don't want it to be a rude question, Adam, but we should start off really with why is Google even here at a geothermal conference? What's kind of driving you to attend, to speak, and be with your colleagues?
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, glad to be here, David. I think it starts, I'll get a little bit right into our 24/7 carbon-free energy goal, which really is sort of the underpinning here. That all starts with a lot of energy that we use for our data centers, especially. At last annual count, about 15 terawatt hours across our markets to really serve our customers, many of whom are on the line here with the various products and as well as a growing cloud footprint. Historically, we've tackled that carbon footprint associated with that electricity using the tools available at the time. And so, and really at the same time, pressing into new levels of sort of what it means to be sustainable. So in 2007 and ever since, we've been carbon neutral on an operational basis. And around 2010 or so, we really started helping pioneer the whole corporate PPA space, essentially off-taking renewables PPAs. And we've been 100% annual renewable match since 2017. But really, what this 100% sort of annual global match gets you to is a really great goal. But it still leaves gaps in the time in between where those variable renewals are operating, where there are gaps. And so in 2020, we announced this ambition to reach 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2030. And in short, that's really about matching supply of carbon-free energy with our demand from our data centers in each hour that we operate and on each grid that we operate. And so really the ultimate goal there is really about maximizing carbon reduction for the electricity that you're responsible for. There's a number of other upsides as well, but ultimately the approaches here, one of the key goals is really being able to scale these approaches for deep decarbonization toward grids sort of worldwide. And so that was a bit of a roundabout way of saying, we're excited about geothermal, we're excited about a lot of the new technologies. But, Google actually has some history going back more than a decade with geothermal, supporting projects and things like asset mapping. But in short here, we're excited for the next generation of technologies. We're excited with Fervo and excited to be here with Tim, talking about some of our work together.
Perfect. We'll come to some of that 24/7 carbon-free energy point in just a minute, because I think it's important just to unpack that a little bit, because I don't think everybody normally understands that point. Maybe just a follow-up question for you, Adam, is what you're trying to do unique, or is this something all industry participants are essentially trying to do, any kind of corporate company? You sort of suggested there that Google is at the forefront, but are there other companies doing the same thing, just to give a bit of context to everyone?
Yes, there has actually been quite a nice set of developments in just really the last year or so. In short, the first sort of 24/7 carbon-free energy goal was ours in 2020. There's been trends in this development in this direction for some time. But a number of other large off-takers, such as Microsoft and others, have announced similar type of goals. Even, in fact, the Biden administration announced an ambition to reach some level of carbon-free energy as well for government corporate offtakes. So yeah, there's one of the entities that's sort of collecting these together is an energy compact with the United Nations, a number of companies signing on to that. So I think there's some good sort of growing development here, recognition that this is the right thing to do.
Gotcha. Thanks, Sam. I mean, just in terms of then, what are you doing so to try and achieve that, and how does geothermal essentially fit in with that goal? Can you just sort of dive that a little bit more? And Tim, it'd be good if you also sort of just chip into that, because obviously that's your bag as well.
Yeah, Tim, I'll welcome your thought. I'll kick it off here. I think it's a good one. I think a helpful approach that sort of breaks down the general approach can be put into three pillars, we call them: transactions, policies, and technologies. On the transaction side, there's a recognition we really need to develop new approaches for transactions, for actually buying clean energy around the clock. I'll give a quick example for the three pillars. We've announced projects or more sort of multi-project deals in both Virginia and Germany, where we're directly contracting for carbon-free energy, sort of for a certain percentage of carbon-free energy. So a new type of contract. On the policy side, there's a lot that's happening. It's really about developing partnerships and advocating for the policies that can really accelerate decarbonization of electricity grids. There's a lot happening here. We've actually written an energy policy roadmap for 24/7 carbon-free energy, which is good reading if you're into that sort of thing. And then, of course, for the technologies, and we'll talk more about this throughout the session here, but really supporting the commercialization of these technologies that we know we need, Fervo being the key example here. We want to lean into the off-taker role for these technologies and play sort of the unique additional role where we can. That can take a number of forms. And finally, geothermal. This is not news to anyone here, but a firm and potentially flexible resource actually that can really provide round-the-clock energy toward meeting those goals. And yeah, curious, Tim, your addition on that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that role as an off-taker is one that's incredibly important. I mean, if you think about whether it's kickstarting an industry that's kind of stagnated in growth, or bringing new innovations to the table, showing customer traction is one of the most important things that you can do. It's not just about the technology deployment. You've got to show that somebody's willing to buy it and can pay for it. And so, when you think back to when we started the company in 2017, there weren't a lot of examples, at least in the United States context, of there being really strong customer traction for geothermal. It wasn't the greatest time to be in geothermal. We'd just recently been left out of the ITC/PTC extension, so we didn't even have the same tax credits that wind and solar did. On the regulatory side, the most aggressive renewable portfolio standards were at the 10% or 20% level, levels that are low enough that the variable nature of wind and solar doesn't really come into play. And then on the corporate side, everybody, like Adam referred to, was going after 100% renewable energy goals, which had its time and place. And especially a decade ago, when there was little trust in the marketplace, the corporate procurement of wind and solar through 100% renewable energy initiatives were very important in getting those technologies to market. But by the late 2010s, it meant that, we were walking into potential customers' offices and trying to sell them on the value of geothermal. And, we talk about how it works around the clock and can help support the load when it doesn't get there. And some folks that I don't think had quite the level of technical understanding on power procurement that Google does would make comments like, well, we're already have a target for 100% renewable energy, so you can't get better than 100%. So what's the point? And they were more than happy to average out or use unbundled renewable energy credits to try to make up that goal. And so having a first offtaker come in and recognize that there was this dislocation in the marketplace that needed to be fixed was really necessary. And Google was involved in this from the earliest days. In 2017, when they achieved the goal of getting 100% renewable energy on an annual average basis, they released a white paper that talked about lessons learned and also next steps. And there was a whole section in there. I think it was the first time Google ever introduced the concept of 24/7 carbon-free energy. And they listed out, 4 or 5 technologies that may help them get there: long duration energy storage, advanced nuclear, hydropower, and then geothermal was in there. And I think the procurement market and the sentiment around geothermal was so challenging in 2017 that we used that white paper relentlessly when we were trying to sell ourselves to investors. Like, look, Google said they're serious about geothermal here, and Google has a lot of respect in the marketplace being a leader in corporate power procurement, and so that actually carried some weight, even though it was just a one-off comment, in sort of this other bets category. And whether it's because of that 100% renewable energy target or really generally the risk aversion of power buyers, particularly utilities, on doing something new, it becomes very, very difficult to win first contracts. And so, when you, and I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience who've tried to market projects have had this experience too, where everyone is really excited for you to come back with years of track record on a new technology deployment and sign up to be your 5th or 50th off-taker. But it takes a really special organization to be the first. And without that, you can't really see innovation occurring. So I think, Google's public statements around geothermal, going back to the earliest days, just even considering it, and then the vocalization they've had around educating people that 24/7 carbon-free energy is different from 100% renewable energy. And then ultimately, putting their money where their mouth is by striking an agreement with Fervo that we were able to announce publicly, I think has been a big deal for our business, certainly in terms of kind of breaking through that chicken and egg problem on first customers. But I think also just is a vital part of new technology deployment in general.
Super, thanks, Tim. I mean, maybe if I ask a slightly interesting question there. So you obviously read about this, you saw it in a white paper. Can I ask a question around why does Google choose Fervo? Let's just say is maybe the gambit there. So what has Fervo got maybe that other companies don't have? Be interesting maybe for, I know you're pretty well known in the industry as a whole, but we've got people listening here who maybe aren't as aware. So if you just take a step back, so there's clearly a business case for geothermal in a 24/7 carbon-free world of supply. That's great. And in theory, that's a great opportunity for geothermal. But what's it here with Fervo? And then maybe also, how does that then work into the partnership that you've got?
Yeah, I guess, sorry, David, that's a question for me? Or,
yes, it is. Sorry, Tim.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. I'll be happy to tell you why Fervo's so great in Google's eyes, but probably need to have Adam chime in to keep me honest. So just a bit of a background about Fervo. Well, first off, everybody who's turning into this knows that geothermal has all kinds of amazing attributes. I mean, it's renewable heat. It's renewable power, it's carbon free, it works around the clock, it requires no fuel, and it can be built off of, and it's been around for a long time, and built off of a very well-established supply chain and technology tool set from the oil and gas industry, because we share so much drilling technology overlap. So there's a lot to like, but historically geothermal has been limited to really special geologic locations. And not to put too many words in your mouth, Adam, but for an organization like Google, scalability is really important. It's not just, can we do 24/7 carbon-free energy for like a one-off project somewhere, but can we spur new technology innovation at a scale that allows us to do this globally, and catalyze new industry, and go even beyond Google's own ambitions in sort of changing power procurement market. So I think showing that scalability is really important. And the way that Fervo's approached trying to get more scalability to geothermal really harkens back to my days as a drilling engineer in the oil and gas industry, where some decade ago, I was working in fields where we were deploying technologies like horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, better data acquisition sources, and on this sort of miraculous learning curve of cost reduction in the oil and gas sector that put the United States on a course to be the largest oil and gas producer in the world. And being a early career engineer in that space, I saw all that technology innovation, and it was quite exciting for me in terms of, every time we'd go out on a new hitch in the field, even though you'd only been off the rig for 2 weeks, you'd come back and something was new and different in terms of technology adaptation, and really got a great appreciation for how quickly things can be optimized and cost reduced if you can do that at scale. But as I got more passionate about climate, I started looking towards geothermal, and for the reasons I discussed between the PTC and market structures, there wasn't a lot of investment going into geothermal in the mid-2010s. And so there wasn't really a place for that technology to transfer over to the geothermal sector. But you could tell that some of the same techniques would potentially solve some of the scalability problems around geothermal. So from the earliest days, we co-founded Fervo with an idea of really, sort of 3 different principal technology buckets would be transformative for the geothermal sector, hopefully in the same way that they were for the shale oil and gas sector, which is horizontal drilling, and then doing multi-zone well completions, and then using advanced tools like fiber optic sensing to measure and optimize projects, learn faster, come down the learning curve faster, lead to more productive projects. And so we've spent a lot of work. Obviously, we've been fortunate to be supported by the Department of Energy through around $20 million of different DOE grants over the years, including an early relationship we have with the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab for the Activate program that allows us to spend our first 2 years as a company working hand in hand with the research group at LBNL, which was really fantastic, and then raise venture capital sources, but all around bringing the right integrated tool set to bring those 3 technologies to the geothermal sector, to bring it to bear and increase the scalability and viability of geothermal. And when it relates to Google, and I'm sure Adam will have some thoughts too, we were excited not just about their leadership on procurement, not just about their ability to be an offtaker and their interest in overlap where their data center operations and others were in our geographic footprint, but also the opportunity for technology collaboration where we could work together to accelerate these things even further. Fiber optics is one of sort of the 3 key technology pillars that we are bringing to the geothermal space, and we're very excited about what it can do. But anybody who's worked in that space knows that it generates an enormous amount of data, really advanced tools to both store and process that data, and to do all the and to actually make some sense of it. So with Google, it wasn't just about procurement. We also had decided that we could do some work around understanding what to do with these massive data sets and turn them into actionable information. So we're excited to also have sort of a multi-year technology partnership specifically around how you store, process, and then ultimately yield insights out of these huge data sets that are delivered to us from fiber optics. So there was a lot of reasons that, a lot of things that I think we're hoping to bring to the geothermal sector to lead to more scalable outcomes that have happened in the future, but then also a lot of overlap where we saw a benefit in working hand in hand with Google to advance some of the necessary technologies.
Gotcha. Okay. And Adam, I mean, how would you respond to that? Does that sound about right? I mean, essentially what I heard was, obviously Tim here and through Fervo Energy has been looking to find a way to scale geothermal, has come up with some solutions, was looking for a partner in that. saw the opportunity for 24/7 with Google, and obviously Google with the technology side of things as well, has got that capability to help scale the technology. So the partnership between the two of them is almost like a symbiotic or a two-way kind of opportunity. Does that sound right to you, Adam?
Yeah, that's great. Tim and I have worked closely enough together for long enough. He made sure not to just put words in my mouth, but I think we've worked pretty closely on this, and it's pretty spot on. I mean, look, the scalability is key. I mean, there's a lot of markets we operate where, honestly, geothermal has, much more potential than it could under, sort of the traditional sort of approach. So I think looking at which markets, as growth occurs and sort of technology advances, for the opportunity, I think that is a big one. One thing we didn't talk about here, I think we're interested in the team too when we're working with new companies. So I think a strong team is an important thing, being able to deliver projects and actually also having that solid sort of capability and technology and IP. But certainly on the co-development side, yeah, we were excited about that. I mean, we operate, I should know the number, but how many miles of fiber globally, crossing oceans and such. And so we actually have some folks that are, at the edge, not just of data processing, but actually just working in a lot of the very same and really quite unique use cases that Fervo's team is working on in terms of actually drawing that data and again making sense of it off of the fiber optic. So it's pretty exciting stuff. It's really sort of at the edge here, which is pretty cool.
Great. Okay, so there's an element of off-taker partnership, but also bi-directional kind of learnings and support that can be given in there. And I think that's an important one because you need to see the opportunity in that. So it's not as clear cut as we need an off-taker, let's go. There's actually a lot more to this, I think, than that. Okay. I think, so I'd like to ask a little bit more, I guess, around this sort of 24/7 carbon energy point. We've mentioned it a few times, we've alluded to it, but I think we're partly talking about it as if we know what everybody really knows what it means. And I think us here, should we say, and I have gone through an education ourselves to learn the difference between 100% renewables and procurement and 24/7 zero carbon. Certainly as I remember, Adam, when it was sort of first discovered, or you want to call it, in 2017 or so, you were in theory only running on 2/3 or so renewables for the actual electrons that you were receiving, and that sort of posed a kind of problem in the kind of psychological, are we really achieving sustainability or 100% carbon-free energy here? Can you maybe just guide us through a little bit around, okay, so what exactly is 24/7 zero carbon energy? I know that's quite a broad question, but it's useful to get the definition right for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great one. I think there's a lot of learning. I think there's a lot of co-learning going on. We're recognizing where there's challenges as a methodology is developed and adjust as we go here. A quick preface is that there's a number of, actually, I would say pretty accessible documents, just searching for Google white papers for these different, specifically in this case is a 24/7 carbon-free energy methodology paper, which we put out maybe a year ago. A couple key points here. I mean, I think some of the same underpinning requirements that we have for all offtake are still in play. And that includes, the need for the asset to be additional, the additionality requirement, the asset to be carbon free. So not necessarily, renewable, but, the goal here is reducing emissions. So it's about the carbon free aspect of the technology. But I think that, at its core, again, it's about matching on an hourly basis the supply and the demand within our portfolio. You'll see in the methodology, there is an aspect of the grid's contribution that fits into that as well. But I'll hit sort of the four broad categories of assets, some of which have already been touched here, but basically variable renewables, load flexibility, energy storage, and firm power. Not necessarily in that order, but those four are really important to make a portfolio work. This, of course, plays out very differently depending on which market you're talking about, but we've modeled in pretty deep detail a forward-looking view with different assets in each of our, say, 20 or so different grids globally. But in short, variable renewables, I think, will remain the core of our portfolio, and really they are the core of any corporate portfolio right now, because they're cheap, because they're available, because they continue to improve, and that's fine and that's great. But it's really about the hours, those intermediate hours, where things like load flexibility. We've talked about this as well. Our data centers actually being able to react to the grid is an important thing, along with efficiency in the first place, of course. And then the other two big ones, storage, including the sort of the newer forms of long duration storage, and firm power, all coming together. So again, it plays out differently in different regions. Those projects I mentioned in Virginia and Germany actually mention the different types of assets that we've used. We do envision, increasingly geothermal, especially sort of flexible type geothermal approaches, to actually be able to fit into these portfolios increasingly.
Gotcha. Thank you. And one thing that I've discussed a number of times is in terms of the benefit of geothermal is the fact it produces both, in theory, electricity and heat, right? Maybe the question to ask is, which bit of that are you using? And where do you see the most benefit in this sort of 24/7 world?
Yeah, that's a good one. We sometimes we think, especially with the 24/7 carbon-free energy that we've been talking about for better part of half a decade here, we think in terms of gigawatt hours and terawatt hours electricity. The heat is an interesting one for a number of reasons. Eventually, potentially, providing combined heating and cooling in some places. But as we move into this net zero future, which I haven't talked about much, and I won't go into too much detail, but it's a more broader decarbonization beyond just our electricity supply. There's actually there's a number of interesting applications for heat. One of which is direct air capture. Again, without risking going too far down a rabbit hole here, we've made a number of commitments, including the Frontier Fund and the First Movers Coalition, toward guaranteeing that we will be taking off significant amounts of sort of very durable, high quality carbon removals, including some fraction of direct air capture. And so excited about the overlap between potential thermal uses of geothermal, specifically the thermal the thermal aspect, and more generally about just sort of advancing the subsurface needs associated with things like long duration, I should say highly permanent carbon removals. But yeah, in short, mostly electricity. Increasingly the heat is valuable more places. But yeah, I don't know if Tim has anything else to add to that. Would welcome it.
No, I think that's right. I think there's several panels this week on the importance of heat. I'm really glad that's surfacing more in the equation. I just hit your point home a little bit more though. You think about direct air capture facilities, the first Climeworks facility and then their big scale up are both located at a geothermal power plant. And that's not an accident. If you look at it, the technologies through the solid sorbent materials that are being used for direct air capture, it's almost like geothermal was tailor-made to power direct air capture facilities. It's it gives the kind of capacity factor you need to make direct air capture work from a capital utilization standpoint. It provides carbon-free electricity. It provides carbon-free heat, and in the temperature range that's necessary for these technology components. So that's something that's encouraging for us, and I'm also glad that Google is making that a major focus as well, because that could turn into a really substantive growth area for the geothermal sector as we see the direct air capture industry really take off.
Perfect. Yeah, certainly an additional part of the sales pitch in that sense as well that we'll need to look at. But okay, look, time's always running very fast in these things, so I think I'd like to just sort of delve a little bit more into the 24/7 reality as such. so that people get that kind of breadth of what the reality is about making the 24/7 opportunity really work. Adam or Tim, either of you, if you wanted to maybe just kick us off with the next question, would be great. It's really around the barriers to making this happen, right? We've talked very positively. We've talked about the partnership that's been created here, and that's great. But same as anything that's going on in the kind of either renewable or low carbon world right now, there are always various barriers in place. So it doesn't mean it can happen instantly everywhere. Otherwise, of course, we'd have it already. Adam, Tim, could you maybe just kick us off with, what are the barriers that we're starting to see, and what are the things that we need to be looking at?
Yeah, I'll hit a quick one, which is not going to be any groundbreaking insight, but just being a level playing field from an investment tax credit standpoint is vital. In the middle of the last decade, I've already alluded to this once, but it's just so important for the history of our sector. Wind and solar got their tax credit extensions, and geothermal didn't. And as you'll know, power markets are very competitive. And so if you are going up against another resource and you're right out of the gate, 30% more expensive because of differences in tax policy, it becomes very difficult for the industry to take off. And wind and solar got to benefit from that for a long time. And then geothermal only got put back in 2020. We got an extension in 2021. And then that lapsed again. And because of some of the gridlock in Washington now, we don't have clarity on those tax credits. And so the wind and solar industry were able to take advantage of that to scale. And as y'all can feel now, the momentum around geothermal is tremendous. And right at the time when we are now where wind and solar were last decade, where there's enormous amount of customer interest and investment pouring into the sector, we don't have any certainty on the tax credits. And so there's a huge disparity there. And really what I'll say is that comes down to not being part of the conversation. And just to talk again about importance of things like this pivot conference, and also the importance of an organization like Google leaning in here. I talked earlier about the importance to raising funding to be able to show people that you've got a serious customer, and Google leaning in there. But it's also vitally important from a policy standpoint. And so when we go and engage lawmakers now, we have a couple things we can talk about that we couldn't talk about a couple of years ago. One, it's probably come up this week several times, but the California Public Utility Commission ruling on clean firm power that has catalyzed a lot of procurement for geothermal in the United States. So we can tell lawmakers it's a serious thing, and buyers are getting behind it. And two, the move in corporate sustainability through the UN compact that Adam mentioned before on 24/7 carbon-free energy, through Google's leadership in the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance, and driving policy changes for this really makes it a lot easier for us to sell to stakeholders, particularly lawmakers, that this is a technology that's worth their attention, worth their time, and worth putting a bet on. And so we're seeing that come to fruition. One thing I'd like to talk about, this is the most exciting time in a long time for geothermal. There's so much momentum in our sector. So even though I can gripe endlessly about the barriers, we're also seeing all kinds of wins. And the one just yesterday that was really exciting was the announcement by Governor Polis, who's the incoming chair of the Western Governors Association, that his 2023 key initiative, which is a bipartisan multi-state Western Governors Association initiative, is the heat beneath our feet to address the permitting issues, the funding issues, and the market structure issues to rapidly accelerate geothermal adoption in the Western United States. And that was not something that was happening in the last few years. And getting the right platform, showing that we've got serious customers involved in the geothermal space, like Google and some of the other CCAs and utilities that are stepping up, goes a long way to kind of getting that flywheel going to bringing in the policies we need to address this. So, that's a big one. We're obviously getting on a level playing field on tax credits. But I do have some optimism that that's going to be addressed, because we've got the policymakers' attention now in a way that our industry hasn't in quite some time.
Thank you, Tim. Adam, do you want to, add to that?
Yeah. I mean, you can hear it in real time here. One of the things of this partnership and partnerships like this is just, learning from folks like Tim and the team at Fervo, to be honest, to really streamline, our view and the things we can do relative to some of those, some subset of those things. And so, yeah, so it's great. I mean, just hitting briefly a couple, Tim, you were spot on, agreed on the things that you said. On the policy side, something we talk about a lot is, the value of competitive regional wholesale electricity markets. We know that they're just shown time and again to accelerate adoption of new technology or sort of clean energy and new technology, as well as lower costs for electricity customers and actually enable this type of thing. On the technology side, I mean, I think when we talk about barriers and hurdles, I think, just showing that path to not just, de-risking the technology, but also being able to deliver, packaged projects at scale remains a big one. I think there's been some, speaking of new funding coming in and new pathways, a lot of new funding coming in from many angles, including on the public side, to really drive these projects forward. So exciting times. I would agree with what Tim said here.
Great. Okay. In terms of then sort of other areas, I mean, markets themselves, that merit this kind of opportunity. Is this is this a US market only? Is this a global market? Are there even differences in different states? Typically, as there always are. Is this opportunity of 24/7 higher or lower? It'd just be interested to get maybe a bit of a geographic angle to other sort of barriers and threats. We've talked sort of broad brushstrokes there in terms of commercial scalability, those sorts of things. But what about sort of specific markets? We can start with the US if that's, I know you're both based there. I'm obviously slightly biased where I sit, but it'd be useful just to get a bit of color of that kind of differentiation there.
Tim, want to kick it off?
Sure. I mean, we're talking geothermal, right? So you need two things. You need the geologic resource, and then you need to be a market where you're even allowed to develop it. And we're in a situation now. I think we've announced, the project that we're working on together is in Nevada, and those two things overlapped, and we're very excited about that. There's also many other places in the United States where that's the case as well. And I think, if you see the underlying themes of of this conference this week, there's many things going on that are making it to where the places where the geology and the market structures overlap is growing every year. So as technology improves, we're going to be able to go, drill deeper wells in a more cost-effective manner. We're going to be able to find more resources and make them economic. And there's a whole suite of technologies that have been showcased this week that are going to make that happen. But then the market structure is equally as important. So, I mentioned this before, a lot of off-takers just categorically will not do first-of-a-kind projects or even tenth-of-a-kind projects, and they need to see that track record of success. And then some of those same off-takers then are sort of by law in a lot of market structures, the only people that are allowed to procure electricity. So if you put yourself in a situation where the only person that can buy electricity is somebody who's not going to, be interested in new technology development, it's never going to occur. So that, and Adam can talk about this in more detail, but just, one of the things, for example, just for a future partnership opportunities between Google and Fervo, kind of by definition, we can only go to places where that's allowed in the market structure, and that's not everywhere. And so that's something that needs to continue to happen, because I do think there's a huge role for the leading corporate power purchasers like Google to catalyze new technologies and new geographies around the world, but it can only happen when there's appropriate market structures for it.
Well said. Yeah, I'd agree with everything there, Tim. And I think, having new technology that can actually increasingly unlock assets or resources that weren't previously available is huge. And sort of the new technologies that can get there. I think, a lot of the markets where there are potentially geothermal resources, but haven't been developed for any number of reasons, can now be driven forward, in part because each individual, each of these companies that have signed on to the Paris Accord and the rest of the, serious drives for deep decarbonization will realize that more assets are needed, more types of deep decarbonization tools are needed in the box. And I think that geothermal is really a key piece there.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Adam. Thanks very much, Tim. Good to end on some optimism there in that sense. Essentially, it's an opportunity for the geothermal industry to find those off-takers, and it sounds like the 24/7 kind of carbon-free world opens a really new, interesting opportunity for that industry, right? And also more broadly, as you've been alluding to there, the kind of stakeholders that are targeting net zero more broadly. But the kind of partnership collaboration element is going to be key to making that happen. It's a bit of a two-way street. But addressing that kind of opportunity also, some challenges remaining to that, whether it's that resource or market structure overlap. But as you rightly said, the opportunity and optimism to look forward to. So thanks very much, both of you.
Thank you.